Imagine you are scrolling through Reddit late at night, expecting the usual mix of memes, arguments, and random questions. Then you come across a post that makes you stop cold. Not because it is well written, not because it is dramatic, but because it feels real. A man discovers nearly 30 Wi-Fi networks broadcasting from beneath a lonely concrete slab in the middle of a Hawaiian farm. Another user uploads a photo of a blood-covered apartment wall that leaves thousands of people wondering if they've just witnessed evidence of something far darker than an accident. A woman slowly realizes someone has been secretly living inside her home while she sleeps, only to discover the intruder isn't a stranger at all. And a group of teenagers exploring beneath an abandoned railway bridge stumble upon a hidden room that looks less like a forgotten utility tunnel and more like the scene of a nightmare. None of these stories came from horror novels. None were posted as creepypastas. They were shared by ordinary Reddit users who claimed these events actually happened. Some of the accounts vanished. Some of the posts were deleted. Others simply stopped responding, leaving behind unanswered questions that internet investigators have spent years trying to solve. Maybe every one of these stories has a perfectly reasonable explanation. Or maybe the truth was buried long before anyone started asking questions. Tonight, we're looking at 4 of the creepiest Reddit mysteries ever posted, stories that continue to disturb people years after they first appeared online. So if you are alone, you might want to keep the lights on for this one. Because the first mystery begins with something almost everyone has on their phone. A Wi-Fi signal, one that seemed to be coming from somewhere it absolutely shouldn't have. If you think finding a strong Wi-Fi signal in the middle of nowhere sounds strange, imagine finding 30 of them. That is exactly what one Reddit user claimed happened while living on a quiet farm property in Hawaii. Even years later, no one has been able to fully explain what he found, or what might have been hidden beneath his feet. It all began on April 21, 2016, when a user posted a thread in Reddit as Black Ops community with an oddly specific question. Why would there be 30-ish Wi-Fi networks seemingly emanating from under a concrete pad? The title alone grabbed people's attention. It sounded like either the beginning of a science fiction story or someone who had completely misunderstood how wireless networks worked. But once readers opened the post, they quickly realized this wasn't a joke. The user explained that he had recently spent several months living on a semi-rural farm property in Hawaii. It wasn't the kind of place where dozens of houses sat shoulder to shoulder. The property was relatively isolated with open land surrounding it. While living there, he'd noticed a handful of strange things that didn't seem to make much sense. Interestingly, he admitted there were other unusual experiences he had deliberately chosen not to share online. He never explained what those were. Instead, he focused on the one mystery that bothered him the most. Every time he searched for available Wi-Fi connections, his phone detected somewhere between 25 and 30 separate wireless networks. At first, he didn't think much of it. Most people living in cities are used to seeing long lists of nearby routers. Apartment buildings, offices, coffee shops, they all contribute to a crowded Wi-Fi environment. But this wasn't a city. There weren't enough nearby homes to account for that many signals. Still, he tried convincing himself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe there was a business nearby. Maybe the signals were bouncing off surrounding terrain. Maybe several routers simply happened to overlap. But after checking day after day, one detail kept bothering him. Every single network appeared at almost exactly the same signal strength. Not close. Practically identical. Anyone familiar with wireless signals knows that is incredibly unusual. Normally, every router sits at a different distance. One appears stronger than another. Some fade in and out. Others disappear completely as you move around. That wasn't happening here. These signals behaved almost like they were all being transmitted from the exact same location. The more he thought about it, the stranger it became. Eventually, curiosity got the better of him. Instead of relying on the basic Wi-Fi menu on his phone, he downloaded a dedicated Wi-Fi analyzer. Software designed to measure signal strength far more accurately than a standard device. Then he began walking around the property. Slowly, watching every signal in real time. He moved away from the house, toward the fields. Around nearby structures, the readings changed exactly as expected, until he reached one particular spot. A plain concrete pad. It wasn't attached to a building. There wasn't any visible electrical equipment. According to the user, the slab simply covered gravel and dirt. Nothing about it looked important. Yet as soon as he stood on top of it, every mysterious Wi-Fi network reached its strongest signal. He stepped several feet away. Every signal weakened. He walked back. Every signal became stronger again. He repeated the test multiple times just to make sure he wasn't imagining it. The results stayed exactly the same. It was as though every one of those wireless networks was somehow broadcasting from directly beneath that slab of concrete. Naturally, Reddit users started offering explanations. Some suggested buried utility equipment. Others guessed hidden networking hardware. A few thought it might be agricultural communication systems. But the original poster had already considered those possibilities. Nothing visible on the property supported any of those ideas. Then he noticed something even more unsettling. Every 5 minutes or so, the names of the Wi-Fi networks would change. Not one or two, all of them. Imagine opening your phone and seeing 30 unfamiliar network names. Then, just minutes later, every single one disappears and is instantly replaced with 30 completely different names. That isn't normal behavior for residential routers. It almost looked as though some automated system was constantly generating new identities. At this point, curiosity turned into obsession. He wanted to know what was underneath that concrete pad, so he borrowed a thermal imaging camera. If electronic equipment really was buried below the surface, perhaps it would generate heat. He slowly scanned the slab. Most of it appeared completely normal. Cool, uniform. Nothing unusual, until one section lit up. Near the center of the concrete was a noticeably warmer area than everything around it. It wasn't dramatically hotter, but it was different enough to stand out. That single hotspot convinced him something beneath the slab wasn't quite like the surrounding ground. Most people probably would have stopped there, maybe contacted local authorities, maybe forgotten about it entirely. He didn't. Instead, he decided to investigate himself. He drilled several holes into different areas of the concrete. His plan was simple. Pour water into each hole and observe what happened. If everything beneath the slab was just compacted dirt and gravel, the water should behave roughly the same every time. It didn't. Almost every hole overflowed within seconds, except one. The hole drilled directly above the thermal hotspot drained almost immediately. It was as though the water had found an empty space somewhere below the concrete, an underground cavity, a tunnel, or something else entirely. That single result changed the entire discussion online. People stopped asking whether there were hidden routers. Now they were asking what exactly was underneath the concrete. Then the Redditor casually mentioned one final detail that made the story infinitely more disturbing. According to him, the mountain where the property sat had reportedly been used by the U.S. military during World War II. Locals believed underground military facilities still existed beneath parts of the area. He didn't claim he'd found one. He simply stated the history. But that was enough. Within hours, Reddit users were researching military records, old maps, abandoned bunkers, Cold War communication sites, and forgotten tunnel systems across Hawaii. The theories multiplied almost overnight. Some believed the Wi-Fi signals came from hidden government infrastructure. Others thought there might be abandoned communication equipment still receiving power decades later. A few even suggested someone could be secretly using an underground facility that was never officially decommissioned. None of those theories were ever proven. As the discussion continued, internet detectives dug through the user's posting history. They found references to his former employer. They also noticed he had mentioned an eBay seller known as CheesyBay, whose unusual reviews sparked even more speculation. Whether it had anything to do with the mystery was never established, but online investigators treated every clue as potentially significant. Then, without warning, the account disappeared. Deleted, no final update. No photographs beneath the slab, no explanation of the drainage hole, no confirmation of what the thermal camera had actually detected. The thread was left exactly where it ended, with dozens of unanswered questions. Nearly a decade later, people still revisit the post, hoping someone overlooked a clue that explains everything. Maybe there was a perfectly ordinary reason for those mysterious Wi-Fi signals. Maybe the hotspot beneath the concrete had nothing to do with underground structures. Or maybe the Reddit user came far closer to discovering something than he ever realized. And whatever was beneath that concrete pad will probably remain buried forever. The mystery of the underground Wi-Fi signals was unsettling because nobody could figure out what was hidden beneath the concrete. This next story is disturbing for a completely different reason. It isn't about discovering something hidden. It is about a photograph that made thousands of Reddit users wonder whether they'd accidentally witnessed the aftermath of something far more serious than the original poster was willing to admit. Sometimes a single image tells a story words never can. And according to many people who saw this post before it disappeared, this was one of those images. It happened on Tuesday, December 16, 2025, when a Reddit user created a thread in the home maintenance subreddit. The question itself seemed completely ordinary. I have cut myself pretty badly in my rented apartment. Fortunately, everything is all right. but I don't really want to notify the owners of the damage on the walls. What would I need to make this disappear? If you stopped reading there, you'd probably assume someone had suffered an unfortunate accident. Maybe they slipped while cooking. Maybe they dropped a piece of glass. Maybe they accidentally cut themselves while moving furniture. It sounded like the kind of question that appears online every day. The user simply wanted advice on cleaning blood off painted drywall before their landlord noticed. Nothing about that sounded suspicious, until people opened the attached photograph. Within minutes, the tone of the entire comment section changed. Instead of recommending cleaning supplies, people started questioning the story itself. The image showed a wall covered with an unusually large blood splatter, not a small stain, not a few drops running down the paint. A violent-looking pattern spread across the drywall in thick streaks and scattered droplets. Even people with no forensic knowledge immediately noticed something felt off. Blood from an ordinary cut usually follows gravity. It drips, it smears. It leaves fingerprints or streaks where someone tried to stop the bleeding. This looked completely different. The stain appeared to burst outward from one central point, almost as though something carrying blood had struck the wall with considerable force. Then readers noticed another detail. Right in the center of the darkest part of the blood pattern, there was a fresh chip in the drywall. A small section of the wall appeared damaged, almost as if a hard object had slammed directly into it. That tiny detail completely changed the conversation. If the original poster had simply cut his hand, how did the wall become chipped? Why did the blood appear to radiate outward from that exact location? And why didn't the explanation mention any kind of impact? The more people studied the image, the less the story seemed to fit. Questions began pouring into the comments. What exactly did you cut yourself on? How did the blood end up that high? What caused the damage to the wall? Can you explain what happened? They weren't accusing him of anything. Most people simply wanted the explanation to match what they were seeing. Instead, the responses stayed frustratingly vague. The original poster never described the accident in detail. He never explained what hit the wall. He never clarified why the blood pattern looked more like an impact than a simple injury. Every time someone asked for specifics, he redirected the conversation back to cleaning products. He only wanted to know how to remove the blood. Nothing else. That behavior alone made many readers uneasy. Then Reddit did what Reddit always does. People clicked on his profile. Almost immediately, they discovered a history that added an entirely new layer to the mystery. The user had been active in Reddit's alcoholism community. Several older posts described his struggle with heavy drinking. He also wrote about serious problems in his personal life. According to those posts, his girlfriend had cheated on him before eventually leaving the relationship altogether. The breakup appeared to have devastated him. His comments painted the picture of someone overwhelmed by heartbreak, anger, and alcohol. Suddenly, readers weren't looking at an isolated photograph anymore. They were looking at it through the lens of everything they'd learned about the person who posted it. Some believed he'd punched the wall during an emotional breakdown. Others suggested he may have thrown an object. A few users worried something far worse had taken place inside that apartment. Of course, those were only theories. No one had evidence that a crime had occurred, but the lack of answers allowed people's imaginations to fill in the blanks. As concern continued growing, someone cross-posted the situation to Reddit's RBI Reddit Bureau of Investigation, a community known for examining unusual online mysteries. Members there began discussing whether the photograph should be reported. Some argued it was probably just an unfortunate accident. Others weren't convinced. The original poster eventually became aware that people were investigating his account. Instead of answering questions, he blocked the user who had reported the post to RBI. Not long afterward, the original thread disappeared. Moderators removed it less than an hour after it had been published. Just like that, the discussion ended. No follow-up, no updated explanation, no confirmation of what actually happened inside that apartment. No way to verify whether the original story was completely truthful, or whether important details had been intentionally left out. Even today, people occasionally rediscover screenshots of the post and debate the same questions all over again. Was it simply a badly injured man trying to avoid paying for wall repairs? Did alcohol contribute to a violent outburst that he was too embarrassed to admit? Or had thousands of Reddit users briefly stumbled across evidence of something much darker before the post quietly vanished? No one knows. And that is exactly why the mystery refuses to disappear. Because sometimes, the most disturbing part isn't what you can see. It is everything the person behind the screen chooses not to tell you. By this point, we've looked at a mystery buried beneath a concrete slab, and another hidden behind a single photograph. This next story is different, because unlike the others, this wasn't something discovered online. It happened inside someone's own home, and for a long time, the victim had absolutely no idea she wasn't living alone. If you've ever heard strange noises in your attic late at night, you've probably brushed them off. Maybe it was the house settling, maybe a squirrel, maybe the wind. Most people naturally look for the least frightening explanation. That is exactly what this Reddit user did, until one tiny discovery made her question everything. Back in 2016, a Reddit user known as randomgirl2u shared an experience that quickly spread across the platform. Unlike fictional horror stories, her post wasn't written to entertain anyone. She was genuinely asking for advice. She explained that she lived alone in a fairly large house. It was an ordinary suburban home, nothing abandoned, nothing isolated, and certainly nothing that seemed like the perfect setting for a horror story. Life had been completely normal, at least that is what she thought. Her bedroom had one feature she always liked: a small exterior door that opened onto a private porch. It let in fresh air during the day and made the room feel brighter. There was nothing unusual about it, until one morning she woke up, walked across her bedroom floor, and noticed something lying directly in front of that door. At first, she assumed it was a small rock someone had tracked inside. But when she bent down to pick it up, her stomach dropped. It wasn't a pebble, it was a human tooth. She stared at it in complete disbelief. Not because she'd lost a tooth herself. She hadn't. She checked immediately. Every one of her teeth was exactly where it should be. No one had visited the house recently. No children had been inside. No explanation made sense. How does a human tooth suddenly appear on your bedroom floor? Naturally, she turned to Reddit. She uploaded the story, hoping someone could explain what had happened. At first, the responses were fairly ordinary. Some users suggested an animal, maybe a raccoon, had somehow carried it inside. Others blamed rodents. A few people even wondered if it had accidentally fallen from an old vent. They weren't impossible explanations. But none of them felt convincing, especially because the tooth wasn't found outside. It was sitting neatly inside her bedroom. As more people joined the discussion, the theories became increasingly unsettling. One commenter asked a question that completely changed the direction of the conversation. "Have you checked your attic?" The suggestion sounded ridiculous. She had never seen anyone inside the attic. There were no obvious signs of forced entry. Nothing had been stolen recently. At least, nothing she had noticed. Still, the comment lingered in her mind. Eventually, curiosity overcame skepticism. She grabbed a flashlight and positioned a ladder beneath the attic access panel. As she pushed the hatch open, she immediately noticed something strange. Around the edges of the opening were dark smudges, almost like dirty fingerprints. Not one or two random marks. Repeated smears, the kind you might expect if someone regularly pulled themselves through that opening using their hands. She froze. Until that moment, she'd expected to prove the internet wrong. Now she wasn't so sure. Rather than climbing into the attic by herself, she chose to be cautious. She documented what she'd found and later returned to investigate more thoroughly. What she discovered inside completely changed the story. The attic wasn't empty. Hidden among the insulation were several items that clearly didn't belong there. There were 8 beer koozies, a crumpled $20 bill, and perhaps the most disturbing discovery of all, some of her own personal belongings. Things she'd assumed were simply misplaced. Items she'd searched for weeks earlier, objects she'd eventually given up trying to find. They hadn't disappeared. Someone had taken them. At that point, there was no longer any question. Someone had been inside her attic. Not once, repeatedly. Imagine realizing that every unexplained sound you'd ignored, every missing item you'd blamed on yourself, every strange feeling that someone might be watching you, hadn't been your imagination at all. Someone really had been there. Police were eventually contacted. As investigators searched for answers, Reddit users began speculating about who could possibly be living above someone's ceiling without being noticed. Many assumed it had to be a homeless squatter. Others believed it might be an escaped fugitive. Some even wondered whether it was a complete stranger who had somehow discovered a hidden way into the house. The truth turned out to be far more disturbing. The person entering the attic wasn't an unknown drifter. He lived next door. According to the investigation, the intruder was a man in his 70s. Someone the neighborhood trusted. He was known as a church deacon, a father of 4. By all appearances, he lived the life of a quiet, respectable elderly neighbor. No one suspected him. Nothing about him seemed threatening, which made the revelation even harder to believe. Authorities concluded that he had been entering her attic for a very long time. But one detail stood out above everything else. He didn't choose moments when the house was empty. He entered while she was home. Think about that for a second. While she was cooking dinner, he may have been just a few feet above her. While she watched television, he may have been listening through the ceiling. while she slept peacefully in her bedroom. He was hiding directly overhead. That realization terrified thousands of readers. Because it is one thing to discover someone broke into your house once. It is another to realize someone may have been silently sharing your home for months, without you ever knowing. Even after the case was resolved, one haunting question remained. How many times had he climbed down from the attic and walked through the house while she slept? No one could answer it. And perhaps that is the most disturbing part of all. Because sometimes, the scariest monsters aren't hiding in abandoned buildings. They're hiding in places we consider completely safe. By now, we've explored a concrete slab that seemed to hide dozens of mysterious Wi-Fi signals, a blood-stained apartment wall that raised more questions than answers, and a woman who unknowingly shared her home with someone hiding just above her ceiling. But this final story feels different, because unlike the others, the people involved didn't slowly uncover a mystery over weeks or months. They stumbled into it completely by accident. And what they found was so disturbing that, even years later, the original poster admitted he had never been able to forget it. The story was originally shared in Reddit as famous "Let's Not Meet" community, where people post true encounters they hope never happen again. According to the author, he grew up in North Wales, UK, where life was quiet and entertainment was hard to come by. Like many teenagers, he and his friends spent their evenings wandering through fields, abandoned paths, and forgotten places, simply looking for something interesting to do. Sometimes they'd find an old building, sometimes an abandoned tunnel. Most of the time, they found absolutely nothing. But one evening, while walking near a railway bridge where trains regularly thundered overhead, they noticed something unusual. Just a few yards away from the bridge sat an old cast-iron manhole cover. It looked worn with age. Grass had started growing around its edges. There were no warning signs, no fences, nothing to suggest anyone had opened it in years. Naturally, their curiosity kicked in. One of the boys tried lifting the cover with his hands. It didn't move. Another grabbed the edge and pulled as hard as he could. Still nothing. Eventually they gave up. But before leaving, they made a plan. They'd come back the next night with tools. Looking back as an adult, the poster admitted it was an incredibly stupid idea. But when you are a teenager, common sense usually loses to curiosity. The following evening, they returned carrying a crowbar and a few other tools. After several minutes of struggling, the heavy cover finally shifted. A rush of cold air escaped from below. Underneath was a narrow metal ladder disappearing into complete darkness. For a moment, nobody spoke. One by one, they climbed down. The deeper they descended, the quieter everything became. The sounds of the outside world disappeared. No wind, no birds, no distant traffic. Only the faint echoes of their own footsteps against damp concrete. Their flashlights illuminated rough tunnel walls stained by decades of moisture. At first glance, it looked like an old maintenance passage, exactly the kind of forgotten infrastructure you'd expect beneath an aging railway. Nothing seemed particularly unusual until they reached a small room. The room wasn't large, maybe just enough space for a few people to stand comfortably. Yet, despite its size, it felt strangely deliberate, almost prepared. There was no construction equipment, no storage shelves, no maintenance supplies. Instead, there was only one object sitting almost perfectly in the center. A folding chair, nothing else. Just one lonely chair, positioned so it faced directly toward one wall. The boys exchanged confused looks. Why would someone drag a chair into an underground room beneath a bridge? Curiosity slowly overcame caution. They aimed their flashlights toward the wall the chair was facing. And immediately, the atmosphere changed. Pinned to the concrete was a torn page from an adult magazine. It showed a naked woman posing provocatively. That alone would have been strange enough. But something about the picture immediately stood out. Someone had carefully cut the woman's eyes out. Not ripped, not scratched, precisely removed, leaving behind two empty holes where her eyes should have been. The image felt disturbing in a way none of them could explain. It wasn't just what they were looking at. It was the obvious fact that someone had intentionally arranged everything. The chair, the picture, its exact placement on the wall. It looked less like random trash, and more like someone had created the room for a purpose. Nobody wanted to guess what that purpose was. Then one of the boys lowered his flashlight toward the floor. What he saw instantly erased any desire to keep exploring. Lying directly beneath the picture was a used condom, according to the original poster. It appeared to have blood on it. For several seconds, no one said a word. The silence inside that underground room suddenly became unbearable. Every strange detail they'd noticed separately, the isolated location, the carefully positioned chair, the mutilated magazine page, the bloodied condom, now combined into something that felt deeply wrong. whether they had stumbled into someone's hideout, a place connected to a crime, or something else entirely. They didn't wait to find out. Without discussing it, every one of them turned around and ran. They sprinted back through the tunnel, climbed the ladder as fast as they could, slammed the manhole cover shut, and kept running until the bridge was far behind them. None of them looked back. According to the poster, they never returned. They never told their parents. They never contacted the police. At the time, they convinced themselves it was better to forget what they'd seen. Years passed. Life moved on. But the memory never disappeared. Eventually, as an adult, the poster shared the experience anonymously on Reddit, explaining that it had haunted him ever since. Almost immediately, readers began offering theories. Some believed the room belonged to a homeless person. Others suggested it could have been used by someone suffering from severe mental illness. A few wondered if it had been connected to criminal activity, but in the end, every explanation was just speculation. No one ever identified who placed that chair there. No one discovered why the woman's eyes had been cut out. No one explained the blood-covered condom lying on the floor, and no investigation ever revealed who had been using that hidden underground room. The mystery simply faded into Reddit history, leaving behind one final question. If those teenagers had arrived just a few minutes earlier, would they have found someone sitting in that chair, waiting? The internet has always been full of strange stories. Most are quickly forgotten. Some are exposed as hoaxes. Others turn out to have perfectly ordinary explanations. But every once in a while, a story appears that refuses to disappear. A concrete slab broadcasting dozens of unexplained Wi-Fi signals from somewhere underground. A blood-stained apartment wall that seemed to tell a completely different story than the one its owner described. A trusted neighbor secretly living above someone's ceiling while she went about her everyday life. And a forgotten room beneath a railway bridge that looked like it had been waiting for someone to find it. Maybe every one of these mysteries has a logical explanation. Maybe the missing details would make everything seem far less frightening. Or maybe those details are exactly what we'll never know. Because sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones with terrifying endings. They're the ones that end with unanswered questions. And that is exactly why people are still talking about these Reddit mysteries years later. Thanks for watching. Sleep well, if you can.